Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming. Please join me in welcoming Vice Chancellor Marc Fisher.
Welcome, everybody, to our fall town hall. I think this is our fourth one. I think we have a good group of folks coming here today to talk to us. An awful lot going on this fall. Over the last few weeks, we've dealt with several power outages, which we're going to talk a little bit about today in our panel discussion. And Berkeley is true to form. It's busy and complicated, and this fall is as busy and complicated as any, probably. So again, welcome, and do grab some food in the back, iced tea and things. It's, I think, really important that we have these town halls. I think it's a nice opportunity for us to let you know what's going on in the campus, a nice opportunity for you to provide feedback in prior town halls. If you don't speak at the town hall but would like to send comments, I know that Bill has a way set up for you to provide those comments. And we usually reshape these meetings after those comments come back and your recommendations become part of the structure for future meetings. So please do provide feedback and let us know what you'd like to see in terms of content or structure going forward. So a couple of quick updates, and I'm going to turn this over to Bill Reichle and a panel on the power outage. But the first one is on UC Path. We've been live with Path since April. The Berkeley Go Live was one of the most successful in the system. At that point, it was the most successful Go Live. Davis has since gone live, and based on, I think, what we learned here, the Davis Go Live was equally successful. So we have two more campuses joining Path in December. That's UC Irvine and UC Santa Cruz. And the issue with that will be it impacts the system. So during those periods when they're going live, you'll see a slowdown in processing. And you will see this really up through next June as the remainder of the campuses go live. The last two campuses are San Francisco and I'm blank, the lab, the lab up on the hill, Berkeley lab. And they go live in, I think, April, May. So that's a little later than we'd anticipated. The idea is that by next June, everyone will be on Path, and the series of impacts that go along with those go lives will start to diminish. So be ready for that, and know that you have an HR action that you need to happen before the end of the calendar year. You must submit it no later than Monday, December 2nd. So Monday, December 2nd is your last time to submit something if you need it to be done before the end of the year. So that's probably the most important part of that little blurb. Okay, the two power outages. So we've had an interesting fall, as I said earlier. PG&E has given this gift of some time off for some of you, the students. Didn't always work that way for some of us, but it's certainly been interesting to go through. We've learned an awful lot in the process. We know far better what our systems will allow, what they'll support. I think if we have this happen again, and we're assuming that this is part of what our falls will look like as we go into fire seasons, we're much better prepared for that. We continue to analyze what that will mean for the campus in terms of what we shut down, what we keep live on the campus, and we'll continue to refine this. We're also talking a lot more about resiliency, not just on the Berkeley campus, but across the University of California, because this will impact all of the campuses at some point. It's not just the Berkeley campus. In fact, in this most recent case, it was our campus and UC Santa Cruz were both shut down, and then UCLA followed by the smoke event the very next week, and they were shut down as well. So this is part of what I think fall will look like in California until we really have stabilized utilities and perhaps less fire, which I don't have much hope for the second part. So we're going to start today with a panel discussion. There was a lot of talk after the last event about what we might have done or could have done and didn't do. And I thought the best thing here would be for us to put together a group of people who were really involved in this process, who know a lot about it, who can answer questions. I think there's some questions you sent in beforehand. We'll be taking those questions and talking through those. And also I think we're going to make a provision for you to come up and ask questions if we have time. But I think we'll go ahead and ask the panel to come up. And Bill Reichle, who's our head of communications, is going to lead that panel. Thanks, Bill.
Thank you. Thanks, Marc. I had a long introduction, and you pretty much just said everything I had to say, so I'll jump to the meat of it. As Mark said, the silver lining from the two events we had in October was that we had a real-time exercise in campus emergency preparedness, and we learned what worked, what didn't work so well, and what we can improve on. And also, interestingly, because we had two different events, we made some improvements between them, so we were able to incorporate some of those learnings immediately. Here today to discuss what happened in October in those two events from different perspectives of campus operations. From the podium over, from left to right, Vice Chancellor Steve Sutton, Lieutenant Bill Kasiske from UCPD, Vice Chancellor of Research Randy Katz, the AVC of Facility Services Sally McGarrahan, and the Director of the Office of Emergency Management. I always want to say operations. Management, Alicia Johnson. Thank you to the five of you for joining us. Another thing Mark said, which I just want to reiterate, is this panel was added today to an already crowded agenda. So we're going to move really quickly. And speakers, I'll apologize in advance. I may interrupt some of you to keep the topics moving. And if we get through all of the questions that were submitted in advance, then we'll get microphones out there and you can ask some additional questions. Okay, Alicia, could you kick us off, and just to get everyone on the same page, describe the events in October, sort of the timeline of what PG&E told you and how campus responded?
Sure. As Bill mentioned, and as Vice Chancellor Fisher mentioned, October was a busy month for emergency management here on campus and also throughout the Bay Area. PG&E had given us a lot of information about how they plan to shut off power, the criteria they would use to do that. A major part of that criteria was related to the weather itself, which is highly variable. And so one of the things that we were really looking at and that PG&E was looking at was the wind speed and the potential for ignition if lines were to fall in a certain area. We received both times more than 24 hours worth of notice in terms of we expect this to happen. We also expect to shut off your power. One of the difficult things of that timeline was that it just kept moving based on how the wind was performing at the time. And so we were not able to get a very firm number in terms of your power will be shut off at 10 p.m. tonight. We just understood that the power would be shut off sometime between 2 p.m. and midnight, and we would have to perform accordingly. And so that kind of gives an idea of what we were dealing with at the time. We were also working very extensively with the National Weather Service and with our city partners and county partners and the lab itself to understand a little bit more fully about what they were experiencing and how all of those systems work together in interdependence.
And it seemed unclear in the initial discussions where the power was going to be on, where it was going to be off.
Yeah, I think during the first outage, it was very unclear. They did not know how the wind event would impact their infrastructure. Mm-hmm. And we were still trying to figure out what that meant for certain parts of the way the grid is fed. We're all essentially downstream. And if a particular substation is impacted in a different community, it could and did impact the campus here. And so we're not fed by a substation that's right next door to us. We're fed down the stream, and therefore wind events that were impacting the hill communities caused a shutdown at Berkeley just based on how PG&E designed their grid initially. And that made a massive difference.
So Sally, could you talk to us about how campus, the physical infrastructure of campus performed?
Yes.
Or what surprised you, what worked, what didn't work?
It performed very well. For those of you who don't know, the campus has a combined heat and power plant. We call it a cogeneration plant. It's located next to Edwards Track, and it provides both electricity and steam for the campus. It provides only maybe 60% of the amount of electricity that the campus needs. That's mainly because it was built 30 years ago, and that's It was designed for the full capacity at that point, but the campus has grown, and the demands of our buildings have grown. So another little bit of background, for the first 28 years or so of the plant's life, it was owned and operated by a third party, and it was a black box to us. We didn't know what it did. We knew generally, but we had no operational control. We took over operational control of the plant about 2 years ago, and we've learned a lot about how we want to operate the plant for our needs rather than the third-party needs. When we knew in the first blackout or outage that we were going to lose power, our assumption was that we were going to rely on emergency generators and the campus was going to go dark. During that outage, our engineering team noticed that the campus load, as the campus emptied, the campus load had dropped to the point where the plant could carry the campus alone. So we decided to try something that had actually never been done before in the 30 years of the plant's existence, and that was to island the campus, to separate ourselves from PG&E and run the campus entirely on the Cogen plant. This is complicated. You have a coordinated sequence with PG&E to separate yourself, and it's even more complicated going back on because you need to make sure that your power is synchronized with PG&E. And the risk is that if you don't do it right, you will trip the plant and you will be without power for even longer. But given that the campus was going to go dark anyway, it seemed like an opportune time. So the first outage was a bit of a scramble, shifting how we were going to do it, seeing that we could do this, then successfully doing it. And I know we have team members in the audience, and I just want to say thank you for a very well done, well executed operation. And then in the second outage, we knew that we could rely on Cogen. So our planning shifted, and it was just what would be the optimum time to shift to the Cogen plant, and how many of the campus's functions could we maintain on the plant during the outage.
And what percentage of the campus operations can run off the Cogen plant?
We generally run about 31 megawatts, and the plant can provide 26 at max capacity. We wanted to keep the load down around 21 or 22 to make sure that if we had a sudden spike due to weather, that if it got a lot hotter, then the plant would need to provide more. When the campus is empty, which it was during the outage, that's where we stay. We stay at about the 21 or 22 that we needed to stay at. And if you exceed the plant's capacity, again, it will trip, and then you're in trouble.
And then we can't rely on PG&E because we've already shut it off.
Well, and it's an outage.
Yeah.
Yes, right. Yep.
Okay. So Vice Chancellor Katz, from the research perspective, I learned quickly that there's a number of experiments that principal investigators can't just shut down with a switch. They need some time to unwind their research. Can you share with the audience how our research enterprise fared in these power outages?
Yeah, I want to say one thing is we actually did extremely well. Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, which faced the same power shutdown, was dark for 5 days. We were able to sustain our infrastructure and keep our animals alive, and critical facilities were still available throughout the PG&E power outage, both times that we experienced it. So the use of the cogeneration plant and our very rapid response facilities teams were able to keep our sort of instruments running and animal laboratories conditioned and so on as necessary to keep us going. So we did actually very, very well. Some of the things that were a little bit of a surprise that we needed to react to very quickly and be very agile about. For example, just because a building is on generator power or has backup generators doesn't necessarily mean that all of the air conditioning and heating systems, the conditioning systems, are on that particular system. They may just be for maintaining, sort of emergency lighting and things like that. So we do have some buildings that have animal laboratories in it. Even with generator capacity, we are not able to keep those spaces sufficiently conditioned for the animals to stay in there for an extended period of time. So our staff was able to very rapidly move those animals to parts of our campus where we do have guaranteed or the ability to, with high probability to support, those conditions to keep the animals going and alive. Similarly, we had good warning, so we were able to shut down non-essential equipment. Some investigators were unhappy when computers had to be shut down and things like that, but they did have enough forewarning to be able to back up their computations and so on. So the bottom line is I think we really did quite well in terms of minimizing the impact on our research and sort of keeping our animals alive and our infrastructure such that machinery and instrumentation was able, once the power was restored, to continue to be useful for our researchers.
And are there any examples of things you're working on to improve for next time?
Yeah, so of course in these events, you never know what you don't know, right? So one story that got a lot of press was the specimen refrigerators in Morgan Hall were put on trucks and sent across the bridge to UCSF, where they could be, there was capacity at UCSF for them. This was an emergency decision that had to be made. The samples in that represent years of graduate student work, and so something had to be done. What we wish we knew was that there was capacity in Likashing, just across the sort of biology quad, where much of those samples could have been housed during the outage in an environment that's better backed up. So, there's a lot more information that we're sharing and capacity that we're aware of so that we could do, even a better job next time. And indeed, the second shutdown from PG&E demonstrated that we learned a lot from the first one and did a much better job.
Oh, thank you. Okay, Bill Kasiske is joining us today on about 1 hour's notice. Margot Bennett, Chief of Police, was scheduled to be on this panel, and she is at home not feeling well. So thank you for joining us. From UC Police Department perspective, what did you learn? What worked well? What can we improve upon?
Fortunately, from the UC perspective, UCPD perspective, we didn't have any significant life safety issue that was going on, so that was great. Our biggest challenge, I would say, was access control and dealing with the critical access for researchers who did need to get in. We obviously shut down the campus, and for reasons of keeping the cogen load low, needed to keep people out of the buildings as much as possible. So between the two power shutoffs, we did learn quite a bit and improved the next time. Our key card access system is in the process of being upgraded. We're moving from a older system to a newer system, and we actually have both systems somewhat operating at the same time, and it's challenging to say the least. It seems like it would be simple: turn on a card, turn off a card, but each building is different. Each building has its own different layers of security access for different people, and it's not necessarily simple just to turn it all off and then to pick who we're turning it back on for and things like that. So we learned some lessons. We're still working on that, and hopefully with future events, we will be even more prepared.
Are the access readers battery operated, or do they continue to run?
So they have a limited backup battery power. So if we do lose all power, like if we didn't have Cogen up, we'd have only like maybe a few hours of card reader use to be able to use the card reader. So if the buildings are out, then the doors are going to be locked. Otherwise, the officers would have to go around and manually provide access to the buildings.
Okay. Thank you. Sure. Vice Chancellor Sutton, could you share with the audience some of your learnings around the student body and what worked, what we can improve upon?
Sure. I'm going to start by peeking around the podium and waving at folks on this side of the room, seeing where this voice is coming from. One of the things that I feel really good about as a result of this event is that I think we really worked closely together as a team. I mean, the whole campus. I think one of the things that we try to do is to really be a learning organization. I know that in student affairs we talk about this a lot in terms of what worked well, what didn't work well, what can we do better next time. In this particular case, we made it a priority. I say the campus made it a priority to make sure that the 7,500 students or so that live on campus could actually continue to have power. So they weren't impacted. We were still able to produce meals for them. There was power in the residence halls. The elevators were operating. The child care centers were open. University Health Services continued to operate for urgent care and all the other things that it does. So all those things worked really well. I spent time talking to students after this event, like I did the events we had last fall with air quality, and students felt like we communicated better this time around than we did previously. And so I think that again, is a testimony to how we are trying to be better as an organization. I know many of you were personally involved in the events, those two events, in terms of the power being out, and you could even be on this stage here talking about, from your perspective, the things that you did. And so kudos to everybody in the room that had a role in that. And I think if you remember back to the communication we sent out after the very end of the first event, there was a very long list of people that we were thanking for all the things that they had done. And that was very intentional because we know that so many people had worked hard to keep things running. I think that in terms of things that we can do better in the future, we never know what that next urgent event is going to be. And so I think we're going to always be in a space where we're going to have to, in the spur of the moment, think about how this situation, the newest situation, is different than the previous one, and make sure that we can pivot as quickly as we need to so we can address whatever unpredictable things have come up.
Well, thank you. So I have a number of questions that were submitted by the audience in advance, and I'll throw them out there to the panel, and you can all fight over a microphone. Someone wrote in to ask, why does campus make decisions on closing campus one day at a time? I think the point of the question was they wanted to have the week off, so.
I'll start with that. One of the reasons that we did make those decisions was we decided to take a stance of default to open, and as much as we could. We also did not know how long the outage would last. And to be honest with you, during the first outage, we weren't sure that PG&E would actually shut off our power. And so we didn't want to make decisions that would have large, long-lasting impacts to campus and to the closure of campus or to the limited operation of campus that we might possibly could make in a more piecemeal fashion. I think, again, that decision was very specific to these incidents, as was previously mentioned by Steve, that it's not specific to all incidents. It's just simply what the data we had at the time that it allowed us to make those decisions.
And can I add?
Yes,
so
please.
This is a significant decision when we decide to cancel classes. I think you probably all know that. And this isn't something that we can necessarily make independently. We don't have complete autonomy in terms of making these types of decisions. We oftentimes will consult with the Office of the President. We have a certain number of instructional days we need to meet. And so there's always the aftermath of these situations where we are communicating with the Office of the President, talking with them about, if there are makeup days that we need to reschedule into our academic calendar. So these are really important decisions that we try to make in the moment.
Thank you, Steve. Anyone else want to add? Okay. Sally, you mentioned the Cogen plant. There's a question whether there are any discussions about adding more capability to the Cogen plant so we can run campus without PG&E.
Obviously, that's the burning question. I think what's clear is that we need reliable, resilient, effective power. And right now, the Cogen plant offers us a very, very good method of providing that power. It is directly contradictory to any climate neutrality goals. And so what we need to do as we go through the next 10 years is reconcile those two needs. And so there are short-term needs of making sure that through some method, we provide the additional 6 megawatts of power that we need independently of PG&E. And then the longer term question of how do we provide the campus with energy and electricity security in alignment with carbon neutrality as best we can. And so we have to keep both of those questions moving along together. There are definitely ways through additional cogen, additional generation, additional isolated mobile units that might tie into our high voltage system directly. There are many options, and we have already initiated a study to figure out what those options can be and how quickly they could be implemented. And then long term, the campus needs to come up with a new way of providing energy on campus.
Anyone want to add to that? So someone wrote in, are there funds available to departments to offset the cost of emergency preparedness supplies? Perhaps a PG&E or other campus provider of support for this type of expense?
Are there any funds for this? I understand actually that as part of the campus emergency preparedness plans, we are supposed to have kits in our buildings, but we also all know that the campus has come through a period of economic austerity, and so we probably don't have all the kits in all the places where we need to have them. But it is a goal to ultimately achieve that.
So there was a question about, it was the Donald Rumsfeld question, what did we know, what did we not know at the time? But was there any information that we needed at the time to make decisions that we didn't have the information we thought we might have or we could use?
I'll tackle that one. So one thing that is really true, I mean, many of us have worked in this institution for many, many years, and one of the hallmarks of Berkeley is it's radically decentralized and very resistant to top-down strategies or processes or anything like that. But in an emergency situation like that, that's both a good thing because there's lots of people who know and are empowered to respond. But in terms of kind of knowing what's going on, it's really hard at the top, the people who are deciding should the campus stay open or stay closed, what is happening in our buildings, what people are in them, what things are in them. It was really hard to collect all the information globally across the campus. So in terms of what we now know is having a better coordination processes and information collection processes and just, listings of sensitive equipment in various places across the campus that we can call on when we need to in order to really understand what the state of the campus is, rather than leaving it to very capable building and facilities managers, but not necessarily collected and presented in one place for the decision makers.
Sally?
One thing that would have been very, very good to know is exactly what time PG&E was going to shut off power. And considering the first time they stretched it out for 2 days before they finally did, it's clear that we're not going to get that. And so one discussion that was very important coming out of these outages was the idea of instructional resilience, and that the campus needs to plan for these sort of relatively unanticipated, but unpredictable changes in how we operate. And so instructional resilience is something that the faculty is very focused on. And then sort of operational resilience. How do we make sure that we are set up to respond to an outage that could start 2 days later than we anticipate and go far longer or far shorter than we anticipate. So there isn't going to be certainty in these events or any events in the future, and it's just something we need to be aware of.
So in addition, in contrast to getting 2 days warning from PG&E, we could have an earthquake at any moment. So based on your experiences with communications and preparation and emergency response governance, how do you feel about our readiness for an earthquake?
Well, I hope everyone knows how to drop, cover, and hold on underneath their chairs or tables in front of you. And I think Sally hit the nail on the head. We have a lot to do and we also have a lot of capacity to do it. It is really ultimately about organizational resilience and the ability to build better systems that lead to more robust continuity, not only for UC Berkeley, but for the UC system as a whole. And it doesn't matter if it's a wildfire threat, an earthquake, a flood, any element. We need an opportunity here and we should seek opportunities here to use all of the tools we have at our daily capacity to build more extended and capable continuity responses overall. And I think, that's the purpose of this panel. It's the purpose of every event we go through until we get to the point where we hit an earthquake.
Okay. Anyone to add to that? So thank you very much for the panel. Please join me in. And I would like to welcome Marc Fisher back to the stage to introduce our next speaker. Oh, I'll put in one. For those of you who haven't signed up for Warn Me, to get alerts from the police department, there's the address. It's easy to do. Please do it.
Thanks, Bill, and thanks to this group. So it came up in here that we sent out that long thank you note. There was an extremely strong response to this event. Everyone on campus that could and would step up to the plate did. I think one of the things we learned in terms of resiliency is that we have a lot of dedicated folks on this campus who will be there when something happens. You almost have to go through one of these things to understand exactly what that response will be. And the Berkeley response was phenomenal. In fact, in the first event on Thursday, I think the Chancellor spent the day with us at the Emergency Operations Center. This was after we kicked her out of her office. But it was really great to have her directly involved in the process, and it really helped us solidify as a crisis management team how we work together and how the EOC would work. Okay, so our next person is our new head of human resource, Eugene Whitlock. Eugene joined us in August, I guess 2 months ago, as our Assistant Vice Chancellor for Human Resources and Chief Human Resources Officer. Eugene arrived here coming from the San Mateo County Community College District, which serves 45,000 students across 3 colleges. And I know a lot of you have met Eugene already, and I know the buzz around campus is very positive. I know you'll enjoy hearing what Eugene has planned for human resources on the Berkeley campus. Eugene Whitlock.
Thank you, Mark. My throat's tightening a little bit as I get nervous. I was joking in front about other people getting nervous, but that's me now. So I've been on the job for about 2 months, and it's going pretty well. Before I get into talking about what I feel about human resources and what's important to me, I want to share what the most important thing is to me, and that's my family. So I have 3 kids who are 5, 3, and 1. And so here in the first picture, you see my son Dante, who's 5, and my daughter Seychelle, who's 3, and my dog, who's actually I've had longer than anybody else in my family. He's doing his best to fit in. And it looks like that in the picture. Here, let's see, is my son Ellis, who's 1-year-old, and then that's my wife Romina, and she wanted me to be sure to include her picture, but not her age. And so, sort of a fun fact about my family, so my wife's from Argentina, so she's Latinx, I'm African American, so my kids are a mixture of both. I spent a lot of time living in Germany, so in my house, we speak German and Spanish and very little English. And so when I sort of look at my family, I see the diversity that's represented in California. And that sort of ties into my work, because when I think about why I wanted to work here and the kind of work that we do in human resources, it's about creating a workplace where people feel good and can do their best work. And I think if we do a good job of that here, other people will hopefully look and say, what is UC Berkeley doing? Maybe we should copy that. And if we really do a good job, other people will copy it. And when my kids grow up, and for those of you who have little kids as well, when they show up to work, other people they're going to feel good about where they work too. The other thing I want to share is my impression so far. People always ask me, what's the best thing and what's the worst thing? So the best thing about Berkeley so far is the people here. And I don't say that because it's cliche, but I say it because it's actually true, in that people here are very, very smart and very committed to the work that they do. I love my prior job, but here I love it so much more because everybody is driven to make this the best place it can be. People don't sit around waiting to be told what to do and can you do. People are coming up with ideas because they want to make Berkeley a better place and they really believe in the mission. And that makes it exciting for me to come to work every day, which relates to the hardest part of my job. Not the worst, the hardest. So I commute about an hour and a quarter every day to get to work. And that's hard, not so much because of the drive. I like to do the audiobooks, and so I'm learning while I drive. But it means I spend that much less time with my kids, back to the most important people to me in the world. So that personal part aside, so what are we doing here at Berkeley about making it a great place to work? So many of you participated in the 2019 system-wide engagement survey that was administered back in April. And so these are the high-level results. Don't strain your eyes to read it. But what I can tell you is that the green is good. And so what the green means is that we improved from 2017 to 2019 in every single category that you see there. You should be happy, clap, something, yes. This has become a much better place to work in just 2 years. What's not so good is all of the red that you see to the right, and we couldn't figure out a way how to cut it off the slide. But what the red shows, the first line of red, is how we compare to the other UCs. And as you can see, we're below average in comparison to the other UCs. The column all the way to the right is the US average, so for firms that participate in the survey. So we're really pretty far behind. The work in the green has been done over the last couple of years, largely thanks to my predecessor, Joe Magnus, and the central HR team, and all of those of you who participated in and supported the work that they were doing. But clearly, there's a lot more work that we can do. So behind what you see there, there's some detail that I think is worth fleshing out. So those are our average scores for all of the employees who participated in the survey. But what you don't see, for example, is that the individual contributors who responded to the survey, their scores on average are lower than what you see here. For our women and people of color, particularly our African American and Latinx employees, their scores are much lower than the averages that you see here. Our new employees, in contrast, those who have been here from 1 to 3 years, are very excited and very engaged. But once you hit the 5-year mark for that group of employees between 5 and 10 years, they're not so happy to be here and their scores kind of fall off the chart. The same can also be said for our employees who are earning less than $120,000. So clearly there's some work that needs to be done. And going to some of the highlights, so let's start with the good news. So 96% of our employees believe strongly in the teaching, research, and public service mission of the UC system. That's a fantastic number. 87% say they have a good work-life balance. 77% say they can be themselves at work without worrying about how they will be accepted. So that's good. Now, the not so good. 23%, that's the 100 minus 77, say they do not feel that they can be themselves at work. 29% would not recommend the UC system as a good place to work. 31% do not believe that management supports equal opportunity. 43% are seriously considering leaving the UC system. These are huge red flags for us, but there's things that we can do about it. The statistic that I find most concerning, however, is the 1 in 4 essentially that do not feel like they can believe themselves at work. We, especially those of us in management, all have influence and control over how people feel when they come to work here. My goal, and all of our goals, should be to get that 23% who do not feel that they can be themselves, to get that as close to zero as possible. It's our job to make sure that every employee feels heard, accepted, so that they can fully be themselves and do their best while they're here at work, but even more importantly, so they feel good about themselves when they go home and they're with their families and friends. As leaders, our primary responsibility is the people in our care, and the way we lead impacts the way people live. This is where we should be focusing our attention, and this isn't something that requires more money or more time. It just requires us to work differently. And so in HR, over the past couple of years, we've been actively and intentionally moving away from a purely transactional and compliance model where get your papers here, get them there, 3 approvals. Some of that still exists, but we're moving away from that and moving towards what we like to call a proactive people partnership. The perception of HR as a cold bureaucracy that you have to navigate in order to help you file paperwork or write up an employee should be a thing of the past. We're not there yet, but that's what we're striving towards. In order to keep that archaic mindset in the past, and in recognition of the work that we have done in the last couple of years and have to continue to do moving forward, if we want this to feel like a great place to work for everyone, we're going to change the name from Human Resources to Berkeley People and Culture. To be clear, culture does not mean that we or I am going to try to impose some sort of standard culture on everybody here, or that you have to leave your own culture at home, or that departments can't have their own culture. What it does talk about is our focus on creating and maintaining a culture at work that allows us to be our best selves and do our best work. So, here are the things that you can look forward to from people and culture in the next year and going forward to try to continue to drive employee engagement so that people can feel like they are themselves and that they're doing their best work. So we're going to continue increasing in staff development. So most of you are familiar with the new program that we have with the University Extension that opens up more classes and more opportunities. We also have courses such as Berkeley People Management that people should look at, growing as a coach so that we can give you as managers the skills that you need to further develop the relationships that you have with employees. In addition, we're going to be updating our campus policies around professional development so that people have more opportunities and so that we're putting people in a position where it's harder to hear no or harder to say no when somebody does want to develop their skills. In addition, we are launching the Achieve Together program, which most of you, if not all of you, have heard about by now. It's our new performance management program that's basically going to try to institutionalize a coaching culture here at Berkeley that will have managers and employees have regular check-ins where they talk about how is the work going, not just did you meet your goals. Another important feature of Achieve Together is the incorporation of respect and inclusive behaviors into the evaluation criteria. Respect is a part of excellence, and brilliant jerks should find it very uncomfortable to work here at Berkeley. We are also going to create in Central Human Resources a director position for diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. This is going to take the position that used to belong to SID in equity inclusion, move it over to HR, assign 3 or 4 staff to the position, and that position's focus is really going to be developing our institutional focus on inclusion and belonging. The focus is going to be on our most marginalized staff, which typically are women and people of color and people in the identity-based organizations, because from the data that we have, we know that those folks face the most barriers to be successful here at UC Berkeley. This director will, for example, oversee the leadership and career enhancement program that we created for staff of color that is focused on removing institutional barriers and supporting our staff of color to make sure that they have the same opportunities for advancement, equitable opportunities, as their white colleagues. Lastly, I want to highlight that we're going to do campus-wide training for diversity, inclusion, and implicit bias. Now it's kind of, if you feel like it, you can do it. Maybe a hiring committee requires it. But this goes beyond, in my mind, creating the right environment for making hiring selections. This is about the environment that we experience every day when we come here to work. And if we truly want to be good leaders here and we want to make people feel cared for, we should learn about the kinds of behaviors that we can engage in that will cause that to happen. We can't just leave it to chance. So creating a sense of belonging for all employees is what's going to get us to the next level as an employer. UC Berkeley is already a great institution. It should also be a great employer. We have what it takes, we just have to do it and do it intentionally. To put it in simple terms, there are things that we can do on a daily basis that are very simple. Since I've been here, my phone has rung about 5 times. Nobody ever picks up the phone. So the next time somebody does something, I'm ignoring the red flashing light here. So the next time somebody does something good that you're thankful for, pick up the phone and call them and tell them that you're thankful and tell them why. Even better, go to their office. And if they're not there, leave a Post-it on their note saying you stopped by to say thank you. A Post-it can be very, very powerful, and it costs less than a penny. At the next one-on-one that you have with an employee, and hopefully all of you are having one-on-ones, you ask what you can do to support that employee's work. Most importantly, or maybe more importantly, you ask, is there anything that I'm doing that I should stop that's getting in the way of you getting done what needs to get done? At the end of the day, our people-centric focus is what's behind changing the name from HR to people and culture. And our shared goal, hopefully, our shared goal by everyone here is to make this a great place to work for everyone. Thank you.
That's Eugene, if you hadn't met him. So doing a lot of really great things, and I think just, keep your eyes open or ears, and you'll hear a lot of potential training and ways to grow as staff members, and we're all really dedicated to that. Our next speaker is Jim Knowlton, who's our athletic director on campus. He became athletic director at Berkeley in May 2018. Prior to joining Berkeley, Jim was at the Air Force Academy in the same position, and at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, where he was named the National Association of Collegiate Director of Athletics, Athletic Director of the Year. It's a tongue twister. And please welcome Jim Knowlton.
All right, how's everyone doing? Still awake? Awesome. How many went to the football game this weekend? All right. Anybody know who won the game? All right, so that was good for Justin and the team. We were excited, and a lot of other good things this weekend I thought I'd just share real quickly. Our women's volleyball team won their 20th game of the season. They're in second place in the Pac-12, and new coach, Sam Croson, has done a phenomenal job with them. And, you know, it's really excited to see someone come in, really get people excited about his team and have some great success. Our men's basketball team won their first game under Marc Fox, sort of in the middle of last week. And our women's soccer team just qualified for the NCAAs. So really a fun, exciting weekend. I was able to get our USC game time scheduled for 8 o'clock at night. How great is that, huh? I was asked by a bunch of alums, you know, can you believe that we got an 8 o'clock start? And I said, I know, I couldn't get 9 o'clock. I really worked hard at getting 9, and needless to say, I was thrown out of that meeting by the alums. So we also inducted a Hall of Fame class, and it was an absolute, right in this room, 300 plus people, and I consolidated just because I thought it would be fun. You know, it was 7 individuals and 1 team, a crew team, and these were sort of what they represented. We had 6 national champions, 5 players of the year, 4 Olympians and 8 Olympic medals, 3 Pac-10 medal winners, which is the top student athlete from our school, 2 Women's College World Series participants, and 1 world record holder who has multiple world records. And, you know, when you think about the quality of the athletes that have come before and obviously participating now, it really, really is impressive. So my job today is just to really briefly talk a little bit about, you know, our priorities and vision. And I thought I'd do it around student athletes and make sure that I'm flipping the slides and it's working. And so for my first 18 months, we've worked on our strategic plan, and we published it about 2 months ago. And it really was important to help us focus on where we're going, what we're doing, and how do we get everybody to be pulling in the same direction. And so what you can see up here is both our mission statement, our vision statement, our core values, and then our strategic priorities. And I won't read them for you because I know we've got a very intelligent group here today. I was told that you were all hand-selected for the town hall. So I won't do that. But what I will just talk a little bit about is our strategic priorities. And the first one, student-athlete experience, is truly our number 1 priority. And I'll talk a little bit about something special that we're doing in the next slide. Academic success, we just had our best year in the history of our athletic department, from a graduation success rate, from an academic progress rate, from a grade point average, and we're not there yet. But I really feel good that our coaches understand the importance of academics. I really feel good our student athletes do. And I feel good that they're working hard to balance both their academic experience, their athletic experience, and then their growth experience while they're here at Cal. A couple other things. You know, from a competitive success, you heard what the Hall of Fame looked like. We had another national champion team in our men's swimming and diving team, and our coach was selected to be the Olympic coach in 2020 in Tokyo for the men's swimming team. But we also had an individual, Cameron Rogers, who won the hammer throw. And when you hear her story and she talks about, you know, how important her coaching staff has been to her development, both in the classroom and on the fields of friendly strife, you say, boy, that is the model. That's, if we could bottle that up, it really would be exactly what we'd tell every recruit, and we'd tell anybody that is interested in coming to Cal as a potential student athlete. We have a budget for the next 6 years in the athletic department. And as I've told many people, and especially when I was briefing the faculty senate, I am so thrilled that we have a budget for the next 6 years, and I'm also petrified that we have a budget for the next 6 years. So I feel like it's put a lot of pressure on us, but as I've been talking to faculty and meeting folks around campus, it's no longer the first conversation we have, oh, you guys can't balance your budget. Yep, we've got a budget, we know what it is for the next 6 years, and we're really excited. And my hat is off to Chancellor Christ, who has really worked hard, 11 meetings together, to come up with a budget that will allow us to grow, to thrive, and to really husband the resources that are so critical here on campus. Our culture, diversity, equity, and inclusion, we worked hard in the department to bring everyone together to help develop the strategic plan, and the folks that helped us work through it, they said they've done hundreds of these and they never had all the people in the department participate. And so that's good news and bad news. The good news is we've got 1,000 ideas in each one of these, and the bad news is now we're trying to prioritize and make sure that we get the return on investment and we invest in those things that can truly make a difference for our department. And then the last thing is campus integration. We've been really looking at how does the athletic department, which I feel is pulled away a little bit from campus because of budgets and other challenges that we've had, how do we reintegrate ourselves? And, you know, from our student athletes helping on move-in day for the rest of the students to using a football game as a sort of a Cal day, we're really trying to find ways to integrate our department back into the campus. And so the one I didn't talk about and I thought I'd talk about right now is the student athlete experience. And you can see those are really the three pillars. And if we click one more, we are just building this Cameron Institute. We had a person named Brian Cameron give a major gift and said he really wanted to be involved in how we develop young men and women as student athletes through their 4 years. And so very focused on career development, community engagement, and personal leadership development. We just hired Dr. Marissa Nichols, who is going to be the first director of the Cameron Institute. And I can just tell you she is a leader throughout the country in developing young men and women, and she is going to be absolutely superb for us as we become transformational leaders in this space across the country. And so very excited about that. We're excited to see her sort of fly this airplane while she's building it, which is a little bit of a challenge, but I think that it'll have long-lasting effects on our student athletes as we prepare them, one, for their best first job, getting out of Cal, and then for lifelong learning as they continue on. And so, my last one is the goal of being a model of comprehensive excellence, developing leaders of character, and we're really excited about the direction we're going. We're excited about the support we continue to get from campus, and most importantly, go Bears.
That was Jim Knowlton. So if you haven't gone to a game or seen Jim somewhere else, introduce yourselves and try to go to as many of those events as possible. They're pretty great. Jim's brought a lot of energy back to the athletic program, I think, and it's really exciting to see what's happening there. It's a lot of fun. Okay, our next two speakers are going to talk about our long-range development plan. Berkeley's in the middle of that plan right now, so we're joined today by John Arvin. John joined Berkeley in February. A lot of new people on the campus, which, you know, going back to power outages, it's interesting to do these things with a group of folks who, especially at the administrative level, are relatively new in their jobs. And this is a great group of administrators. I'm not self-congratulating, but it is a really good team. And the folks you've seen today and the next few that you're going to meet are all part of what makes a great team at Berkeley. So John joined Berkeley in February as our new Associate Vice Chancellor for Capital Strategies. He came to us from Southern California, where he was part of Woodridge Capital Partners and previously Pardee Homes, where he oversaw real estate development. Also, when we hired John about a little less than a year ago, I guess, his daughter was also a senior here, and I think she's since graduated. He's nodding yes. Also, Wendy Hillis is joining us today. She's our new campus architect. Wendy comes to us from Tulane University, where she was the campus architect, and before that she was at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill, where she had the role of historic preservation architect on that campus, two really beautiful campuses. So please join me in welcoming John and Wendy, and they will talk about our long-range development plan.
Okay, since there are two of us up here, we were strategizing. John's going to sit for a minute. I'm going to start off talking about the long-range development plan, and then John's going to follow up with some information on projects and project process that we've been developing. How many of you in this room have been to workshops in the last semester about our long-range development plan and campus master plan? Okay, thank you for those of you who have come. This will be a little bit of a repeat for you. So as Marc mentioned, we're in the middle of our long-range development plan and campus master plan right now. So it's this great opportune time that I've arrived to be able to set this vision for the next 15 to 20 years of development on campus. And the first question is, why does UC Berkeley need to update these plans? These images are from the first plans that were done for campus in 1898. This is the John Galen Howard plan. And really the initial idea of campus was this very naturalistic landscape that you see in the slopes and the stream overlaid with this very classical, highly regulated architecture. And that's a theme that still goes through our campus today, although it has certainly emerged from that in different ways. We have a long history of master plans on this campus, and here are a few that have been done over the years. And they're all related to different stressors that are being put on campus at any given time. After World War II, it's about the returning GIs and the need to accommodate increased growth on campus. Then we have the baby boomers, the desire to increase pedestrianization on campus, ideas around sustainability that showed up in the 1990s. And our last master plan that was done in 2005, that's the last one you see there. So it's been 15 years since we've done this process, but there are a number of things that have come to the fore in those intervening years. The biggest one is the increased enrollment that we have had on campus and what that does to the space that we have here and what we need to accommodate going forward. Other pressures include seismic assessments and rehabilitation that's needed, deferred maintenance, the need for sustainability and resilience. All of those are coming together as we look at this new long-range development plan and campus master plan. So backing up a minute, now that I've established that we need to do this and we should do this and we have new and emerging priorities, I'm talking about two different documents here, so it's worth parsing a little bit what those two are. The Long-Range Development Plan, or LRDP, and then the Campus Master Plan. The Long-Range Development Plan is the mechanism by which we are able to permit our work here on campus. It is a document, and I'm looking out at David Robinson in the audience to see if he is agreeing with me or not. It's a document that is required by the UC Regents, required of all UC campuses. And it's basically like a specific plan for a city. It sets out, here's how much we think we're going to grow over a certain period of time. Here's the number of square feet we're going to build over that period of time. Here are the different land uses we're going to have. We're going to put housing here, and we're going to put academics here. And sets these very broad swaths in which we can develop. And in conjunction with this, we look at our environmental impacts. This is the Environmental Impact Report, or EIR, part of this. We look at our environmental impacts, and this becomes a legal document that is adopted by the regents and sets forth what our responsibilities are in mitigating the development that we think we're going to have over the next 15 to 20 years. And then we are able to develop projects that fall within that. In contrast, the Campus Master Plan, that I don't have a slide for, is a little more granular. It gets into specific projects on specific sites, specific square footages, maybe some budgets around those, maybe what they're going to look like, so we could start fundraising for them, as well as ideas around sequencing and how we're going to surge or move things around. How long does this take? About 2 years. We're about a semester in right now. We expect that we will get full approval on both of these in the summer of 2021. They're both very much in the same phase right now, an information gathering phase, where we've been going out and doing workshops and gathering data. They're going to diverge in the near future as we start to look at solutions and start to split apart kind of the different purposes of these two documents. Of course, like anything at UC Berkeley, there is a big governance structure, including a working group and an advisory group, and there are people in this room that are on both, ultimately going up to the Chancellor and Provost and to the UC Regents for approval. We have hired a consultant team to do this. They are wonderful. They do this work at a lot of different college campuses, and a really robust set of consultants that are underneath them. And most importantly, we have really been aiming for this robust campus and community engagement. This process is only as good as the feedback we get. So this is a list of all the people that we've met with thus far in this information gathering phase. We will be going back and reporting out what we've heard as well as some of our solutions in the semester going forward. And there are websites if you're interested and you'd like to check it out, lrdp.berkeley.edu and masterplan.berkeley.edu. Both have resources, summaries of all the things we're looking at. And lastly, before I hand this over to John, the emerging themes that have come out of the workshops that we've done so far. I need to put my glasses on. Number one, that the campus is a physical endowment that should be valued and stewarded, that we need to invest strategically in new construction and renewal of existing assets, that campus mobility and accessibility needs need to be integrated with land use, and that we need to support our sustainability goals for climate adaptation. So these are these emerging themes that have come out from our discussions with folks, and of course this gets overlaid and informed by the campus strategic plan, because ultimately we are here to provide the spaces that support the learning environment here on campus, that support the student experience here on campus. So we need to tie back to that. And I'll leave it for John next.
Thank you, Wendy. Wendy Hillis is new to us, as you know. She's terrific. We're lucky to have her. So, Marc, you started off by asking for feedback of the town hall. I have some feedback for you. How is it that Eugene gets to stand here and talk about his family and show pictures of his dog, and I get to talk about a new process? Okay. So, as the head of capital projects, I thought I would start off with, what is a capital project? So a capital project is any construction project on campus that costs more than $35,000. And so it can be something as simple as a roof replacement or repair, or as complicated and expensive as a brand new student housing building like Blackwell Hall. And it includes everything, every kind of project in between those two extremes. So at any given time, we can have hundreds of capital projects going on. This is a graphic to show you. This actually comes from our website. You can go on and access any of these existing capital projects at any time. We currently have something on the order of 300 capital projects ongoing today. So as we are the head of the capital projects and we are often the face of the capital projects, the reality is we aren't making all the decisions. We are really the caretakers of the projects to make sure that they are designed properly, that we include the proper stakeholders in their look and design and feel and programming, that we do the permitting properly, we do the bidding, procurement, and construction properly. We are the caretakers of that, but we don't do it alone. We do it with a very wide, thick crosscut through the campus and surrounding community. So that's the process I'm going to talk about. So we've worked pretty hard over the last few months to really kind of reinforce and re-socialize the approval process that we go through for all of our capital projects. The decisions are made by what we call the Capital Planning Committee. The Capital Planning Committee is headed by the provost, and it's chaired by the provost. Its membership includes a wide swath through the campus community, academics, administration, and staff. And what we've done here, and this graphic simplifies it for us, but we have three core groups that are involved in different parts of designing and permitting a project. The first group you'll see here is the first row, and that's the academic programming piece. The idea here is for us to have a committee of faculty members that's heavily involved in the designing of any academic programming space for obvious reasons, to the extent a building or parts of a building are going to be used by students and academia. We want to make sure that we have those end users in mind, and they are key participants in the design of those spaces. So this group, the academic programming group, will review the programming, they'll design the program, and they'll report back to the capital planning committee. The second group that you see here on the chart is the Finance Review Committee. These will be specialized finance folks headed up by our CFO that will review the finances of every project. Some projects, if they're small enough, might be paid for example, by an academic unit. Some projects perhaps need to be financed. So the idea of the Finance Review Committee is to review the financing and make sure that the project is viable from a financial standpoint. Similarly, they will report back to the Planning Commission, the Capital Planning Committee, their findings and recommendations around finance. And then the third group here is the technical folks, and most of these come out of the capital projects building. And this is kind of the nuts and bolts of a capital project. This is where the actual architecture and engineering happens. This is where we do the cost estimating. This is where we run the CEQA process, the California Environmental Quality Act. It's a permitting requirement for all projects in California. We do them here at Berkeley just like any private or public agency does them outside of the campus. But this kind of technical work gets done with the technical review folks, mostly in capital projects. As part of this technical process, we run it through a campus design review committee. So what the building looks like is not decided by us. It's decided by a group of very accomplished architects and other designers. We also take our projects through a seismic review committee. So that we have some folks here from Berkeley that are at the forefront of seismic knowledge and design. They're included. So we go through all that. And then those are the three key groups. And then we've got it broken down into 4 simple phases. Phase 1 is a concept, so it's just about an idea. If there's a good idea that comes from, it could be from a dean, it could be from a workshop, it could be from an individual, it could be from a college. If we have a good idea, then it becomes a project. And then once it's a good idea and we approve it at Capital Planning Committee, then we go into a feasibility phase, and that's where we say, okay, it's a good idea, but how would it work? How would we pay for it? How would it work academically? Does it support the academic mission? From a permitting standpoint, how do we do this? If we get through feasibility and we give it the green light, then we go into our planning and design phase. That's phase 3, and that's where we actually do the planning. We actually do the engineering. We do the drawings. We pull the building permits, and we get the financing in place. And then in phase 4 is construction. So it looks simple. In practice, this can take anywhere from 6 months for an easy process to a couple of years or more for the more complicated projects. And there you have it. Thank you very much.
We'll bring John back with pictures of his kids and dog. I don't want to, disappoint anybody. Okay, so we're very lucky now, and the Chancellor's timing is impeccable. She just arrived, so we're very honored to have her join us today as a speaker. Chancellor Christ has spent more than 3 decades as a professor and administrator at UC Berkeley before serving as president of Smith College, one of the country's most distinguished liberal arts colleges from 2002 to 2013. She returned to Berkeley in January 2015 to direct the Campus Center for Studies in Higher Education and was appointed interim executive vice chancellor and provost in April 2016 before being named chancellor in 2017. A celebrated scholar in Victorian literature, Chancellor Christ is also well known as an advocate of quality, accessible public higher education, a proponent of the value of a broad education in the liberal arts and sciences, and a champion of women's issues and diversity on college campuses. Joining Chancellor Christ in conversation today is Assistant Vice Chancellor of Public Affairs, Dan Mogulof. Please give a warm welcome to Chancellor Christ and Dan.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to, in just a bit, jump into a series or a whole group of great questions that you've submitted. I know given this time of day, probably the Chancellor will need to be the caffeinated version. But before we start, perhaps you could just set the table, Chancellor, with what's on your mind and where things are these days on campus.
Oh my goodness, so much is on my mind, but let me just say a little bit about the really good news that we have. I actually just came from San Francisco, from where we had a celebration this morning of a $106 million gift for Berkeley. Wait a minute, I'm not finished. Berkeley, UCSF, and University of Washington. So it's not all for us, but it's really a great collaboration. It's going to be called the Weil Neuro Hub. It's Sandy and Joan Weil who have given us this gift, and it's really fabulous. And that development, fundraising is going really, really well. We've had 2 record years in a row. Year before this past one, we raised $569 million, breaking $500 million for the very first time. And this past year, we raised $635 million. So that's really, really, it's wonderful news. And this may surprise you, or it has surprised me, that one of the things that has really motivated many of our donors and friends to open their pocketbooks has been the fact that we've balanced our budget. So the fact that we balanced our budget is really good news in multiple ways, that it's precariously balanced. Not everything is adequately funded, but it is balanced, and that enables us to go back to doing some financing with long-term debt for building projects, and it also, as I say, really motivates our donor and alumni community. The 2 things that are important in keeping the budget balanced is keeping our foot on the revenue pedal, making sure we've gotten about halfway to a balanced budget by increased revenues, about halfway through cuts and cost containment. So it's really important to keep those revenues growing. And the other thing that's really important is our advocacy with the state, the regions and the state agreeing on modest regular tuition increases. One of the greatest challenges of our budget is that our biggest revenue source, which is tuition, has been frozen 7 of the past 8 years. So if you are in any circles in which people are saying, no, don't ever raise tuition, freeze tuition, I really want you to know the consequences of freezing tuition, both for the university, because just standing still costs us $50 million a year. That's with no new programs. It's just the average cost of salary increases and price increases. So just to cover the cost of standing still. And in addition, if tuition doesn't grow, our financial aid budget doesn't grow. And that has enormous consequences for our students that are the neediest, because even if tuition doesn't grow, rent increases and the cost of food increases, and we have no money to cover that increased cost of attendance. So I am an advocate not for huge tuition increases, but for modest ones. If the University of California had increased tuition at a modest rate since the beginnings of the real reductions in state support in the 1990s, it would both have more money today and tuition would be lower today. So our kind of feast and famine culture, in which we have huge tuition jumps when the economy gets bad, and when the economy is good, we hold tuition frozen, is really not good for the university, and it's not good for our students. So let me stop there.
So before I jump into the questions that came from the audience, I just want to pick up on a couple of things you mentioned in your opening remarks. In terms of the budget, you mentioned that it's balanced precariously, and a lot of the folks here sort of have felt the strains in recent years of working with diminished resources and supervising people who have to do more with less. What's a realistic forecast look like? Are the lean and mean times going to continue for a while, or do you think there's legitimate hope for at some point down the road?
It really depends upon the discussion about tuition with the regents and with the legislature, that we will continue to try to generate as much revenue as we can, but the biggest part of our budget for the academic program does come from tuition and from the state. So if those revenue sources are not increasing, we will continue to have lean and mean times, as you put it.
Yeah, and so should we interpret that as there not being much hope, at least in your office, of any increase in funding from the state?
Well, I don't think we'll ever go back to the days in which the state funded us so generously that tuition was really minimal. Just understanding the structure of state finance, they don't really have the money unless there's some big change in the tax structure. Now, I understand on the ballot in November is going to be a modification of Proposition 13 that would not exempt corporations from the freeze on property taxes. And that would introduce a lot of new revenue that might change the situation. But there are a lot of priorities that this governor has, even though Gavin Newsom certainly speaks much more kindly about the university and supportively than Jerry Brown did, he has a lot of priorities. He really cares about early childhood education. The consequence of Proposition 13 is a lot of the responsibility for the funding of K-12 moved to the state from municipalities. There are huge demands for prisons, not something I'm very sympathetic to, and also for health and human services. So for the discretionary piece of the budget, there's a lot of competition.
And the second, different subject, but something you touched on, was UCSF. It just feels that lately, over the past couple of years, this growing number of agreements and that the ties that bind us together are growing closer. Is that because of sort of a shift or an evolution of institutional priorities, or the subjects we're actually studying are now more multidisciplinary than ever? What's happening?
I think what's happening is that we both see, UCSF and Berkeley, that the other has strengths and advantages which we would not develop ourselves that are of enormous benefit. So what's happening in the world of medicine and clinical treatment is it's increasingly important to have, as you're doing research, expertise in engineering, expertise in data science, expertise in computation. These are not things that UCSF is going to develop on its own. Likewise, our faculty want to be closer to clinical settings and to clinical trials. So I think we both feel this is a transformational partnership for both of us, and we have some donors that also see this as a transformational partnership and are eager to help us with it, as Sandy and Joan Weil did.
Got it. Super. Let's turn to your questions now. So the first one is, there seem to be a number of initiatives to increase student housing. Mm-hmm. Could you give us an update on where those stand and when new housing will start to become available?
Yes, I certainly can. We there's a project that's moving ahead quite quickly, and we hope will be ready for this is graduate student housing by September of 2020. It's an apartment house in Emeryville that a wonderfully generous donor is building for us. So that's probably the first new project that will come online. We are proceeding with another very exciting donor-developed project we're calling the Gateway Project. It's on the corner of Oxford and University. It will have between 700 and 800 apartments for transfer students, so that's really an exciting project, and that's moving along quite quickly. None of the work is work you can see right now because it's really all work on the development agreements and the planning, but the movement of that has been smooth. The next project in the pipeline after that is People's Park. We have hired an architect for the People's Park project, as well as identified a not-for-profit partner for the long-term supportive housing for the homeless. There's a design team that's actually been appointed, including Walter Hood, who's our own faculty member, just got a MacArthur Genius Grant, who's going to be designing the park piece of the People's Park project. I am so excited about this project because I really want to make what we build there a statement about the history that has been there, but even more so about our values as an institution. And the architect sees it that way too, sees it as a really iconic site that, that the firm feels privileged to build on, wants to make it a real statement, not in kind of starchitect terms, but really in the terms of what the of what it will say about Berkeley and its values.
And what follows?
What follows? We have a stalled project right now. That's the Upper Hurst project. That's stalled by the cities suing us. If we ever reach a settlement with that, we will proceed with the Upper Hurst project, and that's for faculty and for perhaps postdocs and graduate students. And then after that will be the Oxford Tract. So we have the projects queued up. I'm still determined that we're going to double our housing capacity in the next 10 years, and we really are on track to do that.
So my understanding is we're still about 2 years away from putting a shovel in the ground in People's Park. But having said that, have you been surprised at least to date, the relative lack of really concerted, broadly organized opposition? Is it a sign of the times in town, or were we all just too afraid when we talked about the third rail of Berkeley politics?
I believe that's what has unlocked the site has been our commitment to partner with the city in addressing the issue of homelessness. I think that perceptions of the park have changed a great deal. Nobody can deny the kind of wretchedness that you see on the street all the time with people who are really, unfortunately, sometimes tragically homeless. And People's Park itself and the surrounding neighborhood has become a dangerous place. So I think people's perceptions of the park have changed, and people's perceptions of the of what they would like to see in the park.
Next question, we're sticking on housing. In terms of the staff population, what's your thinking about the possibility of housing for staff given the mounting challenges of home prices and commute times?
You know, that's a really, really important question. Berkeley is land poor, as most of you probably realize. So if we had lots of land, I would see building housing projects that would be open to the whole community. We're going to have a tough time building on all of our available land just to meet the commitment that I've made about student housing. That said, I was at a very exciting meeting about 2 weeks ago. I've started convening the presidents and chancellors who are leading the institutions of higher education in the Bay Area. And we had part of our meeting 2 weeks ago was dedicated to a presentation from Facebook, of all places, that has made, as you've probably read in the paper, a very, very big commitment to building housing. And they've talked about wanting to partner with colleges and universities in doing that. I hope that one of the things that's to me frustrating is that we are so many, even though your experience of the Bay Area when you drive around is that it's one borderless metropolis. We are many relatively small cities with no effective regional government. And getting more affordable housing really requires a regional solution. I hope that higher education can be one of the players at the table in trying to encourage people toward that solution.
So one more question in the housing group. It also touches on town and gown, and the person asks, is the city of Berkeley for or against more university housing? An understandable question given that they really want us to have more student housing, but took the one step with a suit that stopped us from building some student housing. So what's your assessment?
I think they're very much for us having more student housing. They keep saying that we've created a housing crisis in the city of Berkeley by increasing our student population, though certainly the population in the city of Berkeley has increased more than our student population has. But that aside, I think they see stopping our housing projects as their point of leverage to get more money from the university. So I think that their suing us had nothing to do with their not wanting more housing. They keep saying even about the Upper Hearst project, we support the Upper Hearst project, but they want, they're using the leverage they think they have to try to get more money from the university.
And on a broad...
And it's a lot more money. We currently give them about $1.8 million a year to mitigate some of the burdens we put on the city, and they want us to increase that to $23 million. That would end our balanced budget pretty quickly.
But despite that, the relationship with the city somehow seems to be in fairly decent shape. What's your assessment of town gown right now?
I think town-gown relationships are good, and there's no personal animosity. It's just they want something that they think we can give, and we don't think it's either appropriate to give it, nor do we have the money to give it, frankly.
Right. Optimistic or pessimistic about the possibility of settling this out of court?
Ultimately, it will settle. Just depends on how long it will take.
There you go. Moving beyond housing, the next question is, what other growth are we thinking about in terms of on campus besides housing? More parking solutions, for example, was something the person wants to know about.
Well, the Institute of Transportation Studies is helping us, is working with Marc on a comprehensive, it's actually not just a parking study, it's a mobility study. So we're working on that. Trying to think about what partnering would look like with AC Transit to try to create just more mobility pathways to campus.
And there was, actually, let me go back to the budget deficit. Sorry, excuse me. The question here is an interesting one, which is in an era of constrained resources, how do you set priorities? We've heard about a strategic plan. Is that the main guiding, or is it, how are priorities set for how the university's funds are spent?
The priorities are set most fundamentally by our values. We exist to educate our students and to enable our faculty to be the productive researchers and scholars that they are. We approved a strategic plan almost a year ago now, and that sets specific priorities. So it's a combination of our values together with the strategic plan that we've determined. One of the things that we've done, some people in the room may know this, is created a very rigorous and structured budget process that the spending of money, I think, used to be more ad hoc. You have a good idea, here's some money. And now we insist that every request for more resources goes through the budget process and stands next to other requests for money so we can make priority decisions. So for example, one of the ways in which we spent some of the money that we had last year was to increase advising positions in letters and science, which is very directly connected to our values and answers a very urgent need to have more advising, particularly in LNS.
Got it. So you mentioned we've had 2 record-breaking years of fundraising. And the person who submitted this question said, that's great, but they have 2 questions. The first is, what are we doing differently to achieve this? And the second is, can we rely on strong fundraising to continue, or do you think it may drop in the next recession?
Well, fundraising is always a little bit cyclical in the sense that when there's a recession and people have less money, they tend to give less. But the wisdom in fundraising is every campaign, we're about to go into the public phase of a new campaign, February 29th. I love the date because it only happens once every 4 years. Every campaign sets a plateau that fundraising tends not to go down after campaigns, but to continue to increase. And each campaign tends to be bigger in what the university raises than the last ones. We're doing a number of things differently. First of all, as I said before, having balanced our budget is hugely important. I mean, just hugely. Nobody wants to throw money into what they perceive to be a sinkhole or to support an institution that they feel is not managing its resources well. So that's really huge. But the other thing that we're doing is we are becoming more centralized and more integrated in the way in which we raise money. We are really taking pages out of the book of places like Stanford and Harvard and Yale, emulating the best privates and how we raise money. And so we're trying to be, as I say, more integrated, more coordinated, more centralized. We had many donors complain. I feel like when I walk onto campus, I've got a target on my back. Anybody with an idea comes up to me and tries to get me to give to their idea, and that isn't the way donors like to be treated. We're really trying to change the culture of development, and as I say, have a clear sense of what our development priorities are, and then be disciplined in our fundraising for them. The projects for the campaign are going to be not nice to haves, but for our core needs. Faculty positions. We've grown the student body by 30%. We haven't grown the faculty at all. So one of the goals in our campaign will be 100 new faculty positions. Another is graduate student support. Another is student housing and basic needs and financial aid for undergraduates, as well as those enhancements for the undergraduate program that will make sure that all students thrive at Berkeley. And there will also be some building projects in the campaign. The Moffett Library project, a building that will be on the Tolman site, an addition to the chemistry building, and then the housing projects I've already mentioned, the Baker Bioingenuity Hub are some of the capital projects in the campaign.
So I'm moving into a different direction, the subject of diversity and sense of belonging. You've sent out over the last year a number of messages talking about efforts to address diversity of faculty, graduate students, undergraduates, and staff. Can you give us an update about where things stand and also maybe why this is such a priority for you?
It's an important priority for me because Berkeley has always had at the very core of its identity access. And that's what access means today. It means diversity. It means serving the population of California in percentages that bear more of a relationship to the percentages of underrepresented groups in our state's population. I also believe that a more diverse faculty and a more diverse student body means a better education for everybody. In terms of where we are, we have several strategies to increase faculty diversity. One is that we are starting to do relatively unstructured searches in large areas. We did one in engineering 2 years ago. We did one in the life sciences this past year. We found by having these very broad searches, we get much more diverse pools. And then we're doing something called cluster hires, which are, we had a competition among faculty to suggest, identify areas where the recruiting might yield a particularly diverse pool and also bring important considerations of diversity to the curriculum. And we've chosen 6 cluster hires, the first of which we're doing this year. That's in Native American Studies, spread broadly across the campus. But the others are criminal justice and incarceration, citizenship and immigration, disability, environmental justice, and the relationship of artificial and human intelligence. So that's, and then in regard to the undergraduates, I had appointed three work groups that have completed their work actually during the summer. Their recommendations have been posted. We're soliciting campus comment on those recommendations, but we've already started implementing a number of their recommendations. Some of them really pertain mainly to administrative units like admissions and financial aid. So we're moving to change the three groups. We're on outreach and yield, our admissions policy itself and the way in which we implement it, and then finally the climate that students experience when they're here. And we've started moving on those recommendations. We don't have the graduate recommendations yet. We have a task force that's working this year on those, and so I look forward to getting those probably sometime in the spring. And we have a number of different strategies that we're working on to increase staff diversity as well.
Maybe you could talk a little bit also about the goal you've established that the university qualify as a Hispanic serving institution within the next 10 years. Why that was important and what that entails exactly.
Yeah, Berkeley used to lead the system in its diversity. Now it trails the system in its diversity. So that of the 8 other undergraduate campuses, 6 of them have already achieved HSI status, and 2 others are almost at that point. Berkeley is way behind them at just 14%. To be an HSI serving institution, you have to have 25%, at least 25% Latinx or Chicanx students. And so I think this is so important in our serving the state, our representing the state. There is a task force that Oscar Dubon is heading, and it's going to deliver its recommendations early in the spring semester, I think in February or March. And I really look forward to receiving those recommendations and trying to make progress on that goal.
Next one is about rankings, one of your favorite subjects, I know.
Yes, it is.
Last year, we had a ranking snafu this year where U.S. News removed us from its rankings, but that didn't seem to affect applications or donations. So are rankings important?
Well, rankings, I think, are too important to some students and their families. I think they lead to very distorted college choices. It's ridiculous, frankly, to think you can make an ordinal ranking of colleges and universities like you can football teams. That colleges and universities are enormously complex institutions, and it just doesn't make sense to say this one's number 1 and this one's number 2 and this one's number 3. How rating organizations or ranking organizations come up with those rankings is they create an algorithm. And the algorithm is usually a combination of financial factors and admissions selectivity factors. What the ranking organizations do is they change the algorithm every year. They say it's to make the algorithm better every year. But actually what I believe is that it creates an artificial volatility in the rankings. So you can say, oh, Berkeley dropped 7 places in 1 year. Anybody who's tried to change colleges and universities knows how hard and how slow it is. So that these kinds of oscillations in rankings are just not true to the actual changes in colleges and universities. When we were briefly unranked by U.S. News and World Report, it was because one of those changes in methodologies that we had failed to notice. We then discovered it, we reported it, U.S. News said, bad, 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 you have to be unranked. And, but then about a month later, with the corrected data, we were ranked again, and we were the same ranking as we were before we were unranked.
Here's one coming in out of left field, but an interesting one. Would you consider banning gas-powered golf carts on campus?
Gosh, I haven't ever thought about that. So I thank you for the question, and I'll think about whether a gas car, it would depend on what the alternative would be. Electric-powered golf carts, obviously, but how expensive it would be and whether we could afford it and how it stacked up to other priorities.
So I know our athletic director has already spoken. Jim, right? Have you already? Yes. But one of the things that's changed radically in my 15 years here, I think when I first started working here, between people in the trees and the controversy of the week, athletics seemed to be front and center all the time. It's been mighty quiet, which I take as a good sign. And there was also this growing sense of us and them with the intercollegiate athletics program. Things seem to have changed. What's your current view of the role athletic plays on campus, and where do things stand in terms of the goal you set for putting it on a path to a financially sustainable budget?
Well, thanks so much for asking that question. I think athletics has really important values for the university community. One, it's the value for the student athletes. These young men and women are competing at the really top of the collegiate level in their sport. It's an extraordinary opportunity to give them, and it develops capacities of leadership, of discipline, of time management, of decision-making that are extraordinarily valuable to them throughout their lives. So there's a value for the athlete, and I feel very proud of the fact that we have a really broad-based athletic program with 30 sports, so lots of opportunities, about 850 to be precise for our students. But it's also important for the community that there aren't a lot of experiences in life in which you get the really palpable sense of feeling with a community with which you identify. And sports are one of the places that you have that feeling. I mean, I certainly am moved by it, even though I'm not a particular football fan. I'm moved by it whenever I go to a football game, that this is really a way in which people are coming together and feeling good about being Cal. It's often said that athletics is a front porch to the university. I think that's true. You asked the question a little bit before about what's changed and that our fundraising is going so much better. In part, what's changed is that our donors, many of whom, even though they don't give to athletics, feel athletics is important, feel that athletics is on an upward trajectory. They feel really good about that. So Jim and I had many conversations about the budget in athletics over the first year that he was there. And we have developed a budget agreement that gives athletics a balanced budget. And I want to explain to you why it is that athletics had a not balanced budget for so long, because I think the story is important and interesting. That the broad-based sports program that we have, at the level of ambition that we have, costs a certain amount of money. The campus was really not willing to allocate that amount of money. And so what was easier for the campus to do, speaking very candidly, is to say athletics had a deficit, a very substantial deficit going back for 30 years, but then bailing out the deficit every year. That's not budgeting. I mean, what it was budgeted at was the campus contribution plus the deficit. That's what we were paying. And it seemed to me that was a dishonest way to proceed. And so what Jim and I did was sat down, we came up with revenue targets and philanthropy targets, which will increase over the next 6 years, when the campus contribution will be about $13.3 million. And that's approximately the cost of scholarships, just to give you a sense, for athletes, just to give you a sense of scale. So Jim says the good news is that he has his budget, and the bad news is that he has his budget. And but I think that the campus is so much better off having a realistic sense of what the athletic program is going to cost, what the athletic department's commitment is in terms of revenue generation to meet that budget, and what realistically the campus contribution is going to be.
So last question. You stepped into that big corner office in pretty challenging times financially and a number of controversies on campus and difficult policy decisions. Where do you think things stand now, and when you think about the future of this university, how do you feel about it?
Well, Berkeley is, I mean, you can never say anything in life, oh, it's smooth sailing, we've done all the hard stuff. I mean, Berkeley is such a dynamic, exciting place, and I think many, many communities, both communities that care about Berkeley, like alumni and donors, the faculty, students are really excited about where Berkeley is at this point. But we will always have challenges, and I think, just like everyone in life has challenges, and I think the key value to think about is resilience. Is being able to think about what your challenges are, what the possible solutions are, and then once having decided on a course, be disciplined about staying with that course. As we saw in the power outages just in the last month, it's not a problem we ever thought we were going to have. Now we have a lot of really hard choices to make about backup power, about how we're going to replace our cogeneration plant in a way that makes us energy efficient and resilient, so that Berkeley has a way, when you think that you really have a clear bead on the current problems, of throwing another one in your direction.
Chancellor Crisp, thank you for your time, your candor, and your leadership.
Thank you.
Dan took away what I wanted to say, and that was to thank the Chancellor for extraordinary leadership and candor. I mean, the answers she provided today are really honest and give you a real sense of what's happening and what she's thinking. So it doesn't get any better than that. So with that, I think we'll go ahead and wrap up. Yeah, another round of applause for the Chancellor. So one last question I think people are starting to race out, which is fine, but there was a question about strong arm robberies in the community. And maybe, Bill, if you could come up and maybe join me, but just what you can do to protect yourself out there. And the campus, I will say before he gets here, is really looking at this pretty hard and thinking about things like lighting and security and what we can do to make the campus environment safer. But Bill, maybe you want to take this question and help us with what they might do to be in a safer environment. So. Oh, that's okay.
Is this on?
This one is. Take this one.
Yeah, unfortunately, being where we are in the dense urban environment, robbery, crime is just a natural part of the backdrop, and we don't like to accept that. And we do at UCPD. We're doing everything that we can, and we try to put out information for people about how to stay safe. And people are aware of it, I think, but for those who aren't, we highly encourage students to be aware of the resources that are out there for you. Bear Walk is one during the hours of darkness, evening hours. We have our student employees, which we are expanding and continuing to hire more, because one of the feedback that we get sometimes is wait time is inconvenient for people. So I would encourage people to use those resources, and the more people are using it, the more we could justify even hiring more, I hope. Fortunately, I would say, on the other hand, we're seeing a lot of street robbery that's happening on city streets, and it's just something that we can't isolate ourselves from being on the campus. Although I will say that the vast majority of the street robberies that are reported that are happening are not on the central campus. So I think the campus does a lot of things the right way. We do have good lighting, as was mentioned, and trying to keep people as safe as possible on the campus. As far as what people can do is just being aware of their surroundings. We remind people quite frequently, keeping electronics and things like that out of view. So try to, when you're walking outside around campus, daytime or nighttime, try to avoid being distracted. So electronics are a popular target for robbery, and people who are distracted, people who are alone, not paying attention to their surroundings. So if somebody's on their phone looking at it or even having earbuds in, they may not be cognizant of what's going on around them. So those are some basic recommendations that we make. Any questions?
Thanks, everybody. I think that's a wrap, and we'll see you, if not sooner, in the spring. And do send comments to Bill and ideas and questions, and we'll work on that for the next town hall. Thank you.